5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
It's how I roll, a shooting star in a film noir. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground.
Hey folks, how are you? Dr. John Baranchak here. John is fine. Happy New Year to everybody. I wish you all wealth, wisdom, happiness, love, and mostly love, because none of the other things are worth it if you don't have that in your life. I want to say hello to folks who have already made it in here. Now, I sense a little competition about being the first one to show up on not just my podcast, but every podcast. And I just wanted to let you know that CJ's stacking the deck. He was was sitting in here hours ago, but I guess all's fair in love and war. Hello. So, hey, Charlotte J. Hello, Jennifer Arnold. Hello, Cryptid Search. I don't remember seeing you here before. Welcome if this is your first time, and if it's not, I would apologize for not noticing you before. John Ayers, thank you very much for coming as usual. Mr. T in Tennessee, hello. And Sharon, hello to you. And Charlotte J, man, thank you very much for that kind donation to start off the new year. And mi amiga Carolina Puerto, ¿cómo está, mi amiga? So I didn't mean to start a debate about who was first or second, but it's an interesting strategy there. Let me see, Carolina, how can I get your? No, I got you up there. Hey, ASPA 60, Happy New Year to you. So today we're going to wrap up the topic of, can legal evidence or legal concepts of evidence be applied to Sasquatch? And this is part 2 of that. As always, I'm going to start with a story. Not too difficult to tie in a story with evidence and the types of evidence. I thought these two shows were important to do, even though we have the BFRO classification criteria, because the legal concepts of evidence, there's a lot more of them that could be applied to Bigfoot, and many of them also speak to the strengths and weaknesses of that evidence. And so that's why we're here today. I would also note that somebody was asking for transcripts of the show. I don't do transcripts. I wouldn't know how, to be honest with you. But 95 to 98% of my material that's on the slides in particular are taken directly from my book, Psychological Horizons in Scientific Bigfoot Research, available on Amazon. And I do have the first author's print of my book being republished by Hanger One Publication and entitled Grasping Sasquatch, like my podcast here. And so we're one step closer to that being available, and that's great news. I think, one of the nice things about the one that will be coming out is that it's got the QR codes that you can scan into your computer or your phone, and it'll take you to the references, and certain of the images are much better viewed in color and on a screen, and some of the audio is much better experienced through a system rather than me just talking about it to you. So I think that's one of the reasons that I like that the Grasping Sasquatch book coming out. But it's the original book that's available now on Amazon is pretty much the same book without the QR codes. There are a few updates in there in the new book, but anyways, as usual, questions in all caps. Talk among yourselves in lowercase. Please ask questions. I try and field them as I go. And here we go. As you know, I've very frequently been relying on either my own stories or stories from friends. Today, I'm going to one of the books that I used to research my the contents for my book, and it's entitled The Bigfoot Book, The Encyclopedia of Sasquatch, Yeti, and Cryptid Primates. And it's written by Mr. Redfern, Nick Redfern, I believe is his name. Let me confirm that real quick. Yeah, Nick Redfern. And it's a pretty comprehensive overview of Bigfoot-like cryptids, not just North American Bigfoot, but Yeti and all the variants therein across the world. So it's a nice book to read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So today I'm going to read the story of the Bald Peter Bigfoot. See if I can do this and look at the camera at the same time. In 1885, what sounds very much like a Bigfoot was stumbled upon in the wilds of Oregon. It fired up the local press, who reported the following. Much excitement has been created in the neighborhood of Lebanon, Oregon, recently over the discovery of a wild man in the mountains above that place, who is supposed to be the long-lost John McIntyre. Again, this is 1885. About 4 years ago, McIntyre of Lebanon, while out hunting in the mountains east of Albany with another man, mysteriously disappeared, and no definite trace of him has ever been yet found. A few days ago, Mr. Fitzgerald and the others, while hunting in the vicinity of the butte known as Bald Peter, situated in the Cascades, several miles above any settlement, saw a man resembling the long-lost man, entirely destitute of clothing, who had grown as hairy as an animal and was a complete wild man. He was eating raw flesh of a deer when first seen, and as they approached within a few yards before he saw them and fled. Isaac Banty saw this man in the same locality about 2 years ago. It is believed by many that the unfortunate man who was lost became deranged and has managed to find a means of sustenance while wandering about in the mountains, probably finding shelter in some cave. A party of men is being organized to go in search of the man. This report is notable in that it implies a direct connection between the hair-covered creature and the strange disappearances of hunters. Of course, it's absurd to imagine that either of the vanished John McIntyre or his colleague could have sprouted a body of thick hair as a result of living in the woods or for just a few years. Such a scenario is not just unlikely, it's downright impossible. This aspect of the story, however, does provoke a very important question. Might the hairy animal, and quite possibly others of its kind, have been directly responsible for the disappearance of the two men? It might seem an outlandish scenario to suggest, but let's look at the facts. When the creature was seen, it was eating the raw flesh of a deer. If the beast had a taste for meat of animals, it may be the case that it also had a voracious appetite for human meat too. McIntyre and his friends may not have vanished after all. They just might have been devoured and digested. So that's kind of interesting in that, there was some debate there about whether it was this lost man or whether it was a non-human creature, or a Homo sapien, as it were. It's interesting that this is turning up in 1885, quite a few years before anyone began to coin the term for these beasts, Bigfoot. It's also an example of something we talked about in the first episode on evidence, in that it uses analogical reasoning or analogical evidence when they say it might seem out. But let's look at the facts. When the creature was seen, it was eating the raw flesh of deer. If the beast had a taste for meat of animals, it may be the case that it also had a voracious appetite for human meat too. And they use that as a launch to suggest that those men may have disappeared because of this creature. So, and the fact that it's eating raw meat would be more analogous to a wild creature rather than a human. Although I think if you get hungry enough, raw meat, even for a human, would probably taste pretty good after a while. I also wanted to make the point about our last show and focus just very briefly about the notion of, because you don't hear it talked about much in Bigfoot circles. You hear the word anecdotal evidence, and what I just read to you is an example of anecdotal evidence. Even Class A sightings are seen by multiple people have not been sufficient evidence to prove the existence of Bigfoot to the scientific community, who is the gatekeeper for that decision. And so most of the Bigfoot evidence out there is anecdotal. But this concept of analogical evidence, is pretty interesting, because a lot of people support the relic cryptid, or a primate, evolutionary tenets. And when people discuss that theory, they cite evidence of other ape-like or human-like ape species to justify the origin and their theory or idea or belief, which is more accurately a hypothesis, that this is what Bigfoot is. It's an evolutionary link. It's a relict primate. Frequently cited is Bigfoot Blackie, or blocking on the name right now of the ancient huge ape-like creature, it'll probably come to me, or somebody will be quicker on the trigger than I. But we compare the findings that we attribute to Bigfoot to similar species, and that's an analogy. So that's pretty interesting, because all those the variety of theories that I mentioned, and I mean no disrespect, but I've recently been hearing them called ape gigantopithecus. Thank you, Cryptid Search. They draw the evolutionaries frequently draw parallels between Gigantopithecus or Bigfoot Blackie, which was another ancient Bigfoot-like creature or ape-like creature that was smaller than Gigantopithecus. And so I know that they're a primate. The flesh, you can group all under this, all these things under this in the flesh and blood camp, if you will, which I've never done a formal survey, but I know has a lot of supporters. And it's interesting to note that that is the primary evidence, the analogous comparisons. When you see a footprint or a foot cast, you look for diverging validity. Converging validity means things that support it being Bigfoot. But Dr. Meldrum also examines diverging validity, looks for things that tell him it's not Bigfoot. But on one level, that reasoning is an analogous type of evidence as well, the reasoning involved in that. So I just raised that point because I'm not sure that any school of thought really on the origins of Bigfoot is well founded in science at this point, because even though a lot of the evidence is called scientific, and it could be argued that it is, a lot of it is either anecdotal or analogous evidence, which both in courts and I think in the scientific community are two of the weakest forms of evidence. So the field still seems kind of wide open to me. Cryptid, were the things I sent you useful? Is this Mark Lynch? Is that you, bud? I'm going to address, if that's you, I'm going to get to that in a few minutes when we look at forensic evidence. So let's get back, and I want to thank Cryptid Search, Mark, for sharing that information with you, and we'll talk about it very briefly in a brief moment. So let's go on with the slides. Let me take Mark's comment down. So, direct evidence is the next type of legal evidence. Before that, we did digital evidence, which raised a lot of issues that certain people seemed interesting. But now we're moving on to direct evidence. Within the legal system, this is the most powerful type of evidence, in that direct evidence requires no inference. The evidence alone is proof. Personally, I find certain groups' plans to kill Bigfoot repulsive, the whole kill philosophy. My book offers alternatives to find scientific evidence and proof of Bigfoot so that one doesn't have to be killed. And I hope that ends up being the case, or if we get a carcass that's already been dead for some other reason, I hope that people still aren't going out there trying to knock one off. But no matter how repulsive I might find that that plan of trying to kill a Bigfoot. Other than face-to-face personal sightings that are relegated to other types of data discussed above, the analogous evidence and the anecdotal evidence, a body of a Bigfoot may represent the only example of this type of powerful evidence to inform the issue. One of the things I typically say, if we're going to look at a carcass or a body, you're going to need, in my opinion, you're going to need more than one, because you need a control group or you need something to replicate the findings of one body to the other. Science typically bases its theoretical foundation on at least 3 data points. And the analogy there is, if you're making a stool and you only have 1 or 2 legs on it, it's not going to be a stable foundation. You need 3 legs. And so, I think for sure at least 2 bodies would be needed, and 3 would be even better. And again, that does not sound like a real good thing to do as far as I'm concerned, but that's my bias. Hey, Uncle Bones. This is certainly the opinion that a body is needed. Is certainly the opinion of scientists better versed in Bigfoot than myself. For example, Grover Krantz in his pioneering work, Bigfoot Sasquatch Evidence. He makes that statement on page 3. Bigfoot, the anthropologist speaks out. Oh, I'm sorry, Bigfoot Sasquatch Evidence. The anthropologist speaks out. Published simultaneously in Canada and the United States by Hancock House and Publishers Limited, Hancock House Publishers. As such, no matter how distasteful or repulsive, I find the idea and the process of accomplishing getting a body through having to kill one, it does have some genuine scientific merit, whether I like it or not, which I don't. I qualify that statement with the word potential, as many conspiracy believers already contend that our government already has bodies that they refuse to release for the public, and an open, unfettered scientific review, consideration, study, and research. I bring this up not to join or support any conspiracy theory or theorists, but highlight a few of the hypothetical considerations to kill a Bigfoot for non-governmental research, should such conspiracies be valid. The first group that I ever heard with an organized effort and a consistent effort to take a Bigfoot was the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. And as I understand, I know some people in that organization, and when they're doing their research, this group, until they can't get vehicles up to Area X, their habituation area, they keep a 24/7 presence in this area. I believe it's teams of 7 rotate in and out on a weekly or every other week basis. And so they are very dedicated to finding and proving the existence of Bigfoot. They seem to have a change of heart in that they continue to carry high-powered rifles out when they go with them. And I would add, there are other dangers out there that a high-powered rifle might need to be utilized for. But they're shifting their focus more onto scientific research. And one of the best scientific papers I've seen is their paper on Tag X. And if you're not, or Tag 7, excuse me, if you're not familiar with Tag 7, I would encourage you to go to their website, and the North American Wood Ape Conservancy website, and they have the paper there in written form, and then they have a pretty long panel discussion on the strengths and the weaknesses of study, and they do very well in discussing both the strengths and weaknesses. There is no perfect study. But hopefully, if they're going to take a body, they've already considered and addressed many of the technical challenges. And I would imagine or hope that these are already in place. Nonetheless, I'm going to highlight a few. Of great importance will be preserving the viability and the integrity of the body of itself. This is a very isolated area. You got to have a 10-ply tire to get up there, and sometimes people still don't make it. So they got to figure out a way to preserve the body. Well, just freeze it or keep it chilled. Noting that I'm not a geneticist or a tissue pathologist, I can only imagine that the act of freezing such a creature could potentially, freezing it intact or field dressed, could carry with it multiple problems or hurdles that would need to be controlled for. For DNA integrity and purity, my fantasy is that a sterile field would be advantageous. And it's going to be pretty tough to drop a Bigfoot onto a sterile field in the woods. And so in addition to, they'd have to be taking some environmental DNA as a control for the DNA that they discover on the creature if they're successful in killing one. Aside from having the hunters themselves garbed in medical gowns, gloves, and masks as they approach the kill, and using sterile instruments if field dressing is part of the procedure, dropping an animal with a gunshot into the forest would appear to present some challenges in preserving the purity of tissue samples in and of itself. And that's why I mentioned the environmental DNA needing to be taken and considered. Water, other animal contaminants, both gross in size and microscopic in nature, could become potential issues. Aside from the obvious logistical challenges of getting a recently killed body rapidly from the woods, swamps, or rocky cliffs of our forest into refrigeration, if the creature's cells are fluid-based, freezing could potentially influence those results. Again, I'm not very up on, cellular cells and the influence of cold on that. I do know when organs are taken from a person and then for transplant, that they do keep them chilled, but I don't know if they actually freeze them. But they're going to have to lower that temperature somehow out in the wilderness. And that Area X, as I understand it, it's a pretty primitive cabin. I'm not sure that, I think if they have electricity, it's primarily generator driven. It would appear that transplant technology and organ transportation process would be poised to inform the integrity of preservation issues. I basically just said this without having to read it. I'm not an expert. I'm certainly interested in hearing if anything else has any insight into that. And speaking of that, Cryptid Search says the Wood Ape Conservancy still has at least one shooter, but some have switched to cameras. Thank you. Yeah, and Jennifer Arnold, although she didn't post this to be public, I hope you don't mind. Tag 7 paper is fascinating. It truly is. It stands as a pretty tall hurdle, or sets the bar pretty high for a scientific experiment in trying to track and monitor Bigfoot. These guys went through months and months, up to more than a year, to develop the tag. And it's a burr tag. It looks like if you walk through a burr field and come back with these rather large half-inch burrs, or maybe a little bit larger. It kind of looks like a burr, but to field test it to make sure that it was going to affix to a Bigfoot, they field tested it multiple times, and initially they were getting it caught and stuck on birds and other animals. So between redesigning the burr, which has a radio transmitter in it, and the placing of the burr, they managed to dramatically increase the probability of it attaching to a Bigfoot rather than some other animal. For what it's worth, they admit that they can't say for certain that it affixed to a Bigfoot because no one saw it catch on the animal that it caught on, but they monitored whatever animal it was for 10 months, I believe, with this radio transmitter and a plane flying over the area and locating it and relocating it, and came up with some interesting findings about the range and the seasonal migrations of Bigfoot, if this was in fact a Bigfoot. Congratulations to them. I think it's awesome. Overlapping and interacting with the tissue integrity challenges is the issues of data security. In this case, the raw data is quite literally the body. If Men in Black reports or theories of other government interest and interference into Bigfoot phenomena have any inkling of validity, the aspiring Bigfoot killer, for the benefit of the species, would appear to have the need to mount defensive security strategies to protect the custody of the body itself against forces and factions of the U.S. government who have the rule of law and national security behind them. And again, at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, I know some legendary Bigfooters that have found incredible evidence, and many of them tell the Men in Black story showing up days or weeks later, except that they're not Men in Black. Interestingly, the common description of this is one is kind of dressed like a Men in Black in an outfit and a fedora, and neatly dressed, pressed clothes. But the other gentleman that shows up with the neatly dressed gentleman is a biker looking dude, jeans, leather vest, chain coming out of his pocket. And the stories, again, that I've heard run for, initially there's just a request. If that's refused, some additional pressure is put on the person, everything from discrediting the person, making them look crazy, hurting their business or their job, and in some rarer cases, threatening the threat of their lives, for what it's worth. It's not hard to imagine the well-intentioned Bigfoot killer requiring a professionally trained and regularly drilled and practiced paramilitary type police force to both guard and frequently shift locations of the data to avoid detection and subsequent confiscation by the powers that wish to keep Bigfoot's existence under wraps. And again, when you're, 50 miles out in the wilderness, and you got a heavy Bigfoot body, there's going to be a lot of involved in getting it down that mountain and safe. To what extent is the well-intentioned Bigfoot assassination group prepared to go to achieve this objective? A rather weighty and frightening thought to consider, but an important problem to resolve, in my opinion. John says, take it back to Area 51. It's where we need it. Okay, so forensic evidence. And this is where I want to acknowledge Cryptid Search Mark's recent interactions with me over the phone. Mark and I have shared an expedition together, maybe even more than one, but for sure the last one I went on with Lori Wade and the BFRO organization. And Mark's a very intelligent and inquisitive guy, and I think in my last ending on this subject, I alluded to the fact that I'll mention the Ketchum study here in forensic evidence because I think it's the primary example out there. But I made the statement that it seems to be largely discredited by the more scientific, educated thinkers in the Bigfoot community. And Mark took it upon himself to ask if he could contact me and have shared some references of PhD level, highly credentialed individuals that are supportive of the study. And so I thank him for that. And when I do a full show on the Ketchum study, I will definitely be referencing those and including those in that presentation. Thank you, Mark. Forensic evidence is scientific evidence such as DNA trace evidence, fingerprints, and can provide proof of Bigfoot. Forensic evidence is generally considered to be strong and reliable evidence. This category of evidence, of course, screams for a review of the Melba Ketchum et al. Colleagues' DNA study. Although it is not within the purview of this current presentation, I will later dedicate an entire show to it. Suffice it to say, for now, the study continues to have vocal supporters and detractors of the results of that study. Given that the inclusion of fingerprints in its quoted description, the use of Jeff Meldrum's cast evidence could apply here. And more recently, if you follow my boss, boss and friend, I would say, Doug Hodcheck's show, he for a while was mentioning getting some blue plexiglass sheets and using long bolts to drill them into a tree, and with the hopes, because many people believe that Bigfoot is attracted to the color blue, and certainly Craig, who I don't see in the audience today, but he has some findings in some of our studies that support there's an attraction to blue. Nothing definitive, but when given a choice between a blue colored rock and other natural rocks, they seem to have an affinity to want to manipulate or take away the blue colored rocks. So Doug's idea was to put these blue tinted plexiglass, I think they were about 4 feet by 4 feet squares, drill them deep into the trees and hope that the Bigfoots would come up and put fingerprint evidence on them. And we all have we all have oils on our hand, and Doug uses the technical scientific word for those oils, sebum, I think is the word that he uses, and in the hopes of getting that and then analyzing it for DNA. The first time he put it out, I forget how many, 8 to 10 plexiglass squares out there. Every one of them was torn out of the tree at the bolts, like the bolts were torn out of the tree. And I think weeks later, they might have retrieved one, and they've yet to find any others. I haven't had any updates, though, on whether they've gotten any data on that one that they did find, or whether they got any data from when they reset the trap, if you will. Sebum, thank you, Charlotte J. John, ever the comedian. We got to go buy a blue tent. Why not? We're using ourselves as bait anyways on a lot of expeditions. You tend to give the Bigfoots the high ground, and you're down there on the low ground, trying to capture their attention and draw them in. So If you're a Bigfoot researcher, oftentimes you are the bait itself. You or your behavior is the bait. Moving on to physical evidence. As would be expected, evidence that is in the form of a tangible object, such as a firearm, fingerprints, rope purportedly used to strangle someone, or tire casts from a crime scene, is considered to be physical evidence. Physical evidence is known as real or material evidence within the legal system. It can be presented in court as an exhibit of a physical object, captured in still or moving images, described in text, audio, and video, or referred to in documents. The thing that immediately jumped to my mind when I read this was Bigfoot feces, hair, or other tissue samples come to mind, as do foot and handprints left on objects and the surface of the earth. I think these days, given that most cameras and video are digitized, I think they would be better placed in the category of digital evidence than physical evidence, especially in light of all the technology to manipulate that type of digital evidence. At the very end of our show, most people had left, and I'm sorry I can't remember who made the comment, but when we were talking about digital evidence, and adjusting the pixelation and stabilizing and all this kind of thing, you really got to know what the program is doing to that image before you can trust that image. And especially with pixelization and adjusting pixelization, that forces the computer program to choose where to take another pixel from to replace it or not replace it, as it might be the case. And somebody made the point that you could, through this process of adjusting pixelization, you could create your own Bigfoot design or image. And, through trying to make it look like you want it to look, you could produce an image of Bigfoot, but it may or may not be a valid one, based on your own bias. Let's see what else John has to offer. May not make it out of a blue tent, but at least I would go knowing for sure. Yeah, I'll pass on the blue tent. Prima facie evidence, prima facie evidence, meaning on its first appearance, this evidence is presented before a trial. This evidence presented before a trial is enough to prove something until it is successfully disproved or rebutted at the trial. This is also called presumptive evidence. This type of evidence doesn't seem all that relevant to Bigfoot evidence, in my opinion at least, but I remain open to any ideas or examples of the same that could relate it to Bigfoot evidence, and would include them with an appropriate citation credit in subsequent reprinting of my book, should I be lucky enough, if the first printing runs out, to need a reprinting. Statistical evidence. This is my big part of what I'm pushing through my book and through my podcast here. Science speaks the language of numbers and math. And I genuinely believe that until we start speaking that same language, we're kind of spinning our wheels with other types of evidence. That doesn't mean that they're not worthwhile to collect, but I think my bias is, if you're going to try and prove the existence of Bigfoot, you got to get doing some experiments out in the field and use statistical analysis to prove causality, because that's what we're trying to. When we listen to tree knocks, when we find poop, stone clacks, footprints, we're trying to prove that Bigfoot caused those signs. We're trying to prove causality. And you can only prove causality if there's a 100% correlationship or correlation between two things, or through an experimental design. So I think my bias and what I'm really trying to get people interested in is learning how to set up experiments within the woods and then analyze them and look at the data results. Statistical evidence that uses numbers or statistics to support a position is called statistical evidence. This type of evidence is based on research or polls. Within the Bigfoot community, little to sparse statistical evidence directly concerning Bigfoot exists. That which does is most typically in the form of descriptive statistics, one of the weakest forms of statistics for generalizability to the validity and reliability of the data itself, and therefore the species. In short, descriptive statistics can be easily manipulated to the author's desires and an a priori or desired hypothesis or point. This is why descriptive statistics are so frequently used in politics on the news. It's not unheard of for the data descriptive analysis to be used to support conflicting views. The number of sightings, frequency of sightings in a particular area, the frequency of the different types of evidence gathered, populated estimates, average size estimates are all examples of descriptive statistics. I believe there's an anthropologist, Fehrenbach, I believe was the person's name. If you're familiar with the normal curve or the bell-shaped curve, it looks like a bell without the bottom on it. It's called the normal curve because most of the normal or general population occurs within the widest part of the bell, where the bell kind of bows up and forms a circle at the top. If you understand the normal curve, normal is between -1 and +1 standard deviations. And again, this is going to be another show. When you go out from 1 to just before 2 standard deviations, be it positive or negative, that's a mild strength or a mild impairment. 2 to just before 3, positive or negative, is a moderate strength or weakness. And then 3 to just before 4 is a severe strength or weakness. And above 4 is an extreme strength or weakness. Well, we call the creature we're targeting Bigfoot for a reason. It has this big feet. Lo and behold, I was surprised, and this is in Dr. Meldrum's Legend Meets Science 2, the first book. He's writing the second book right now, which will be based on the documentary. He cites Fehrenbach's study, and they have big feet, so you would expect them to be different than the humans. And on one level they are. If we compare the average human's foot size to the average Bigfoot's foot size, the average adult Bigfoot size is going to be considerably larger than the average adult human foot size. But the interesting finding in there was, nonetheless, the Bigfoot's footprints fit the shape of a normal curve. And by I mean shape, not the shape of the feet, but when you take a sample of the smallest Bigfoot footprints to the largest Bigfoot footprints, they look identical to the normal curve for human footprints, in that the majority of footprints fall in that widest portion of the bell, and the more standard deviations you get away, the fewer and more rare sized footprints occur. So even though theirs are bigger in average size than humans, like humans, they exist on a normal curve. And that's how we define normal, basically, in science. And that's a whole controversial issue in itself. A more reliable and valid type of statistical analysis is to utilize and so descriptive statistics right now, with the political debates going on, you frequently heard, well, going back a few months, you may have heard something like um, Trump, gets 52% of the the lead um, in polls, and Biden is slightly behind at 49%. And they make a big deal about that number of points between one candidates or the other. But if it's 52% versus 49%, in fact, on the normal curve, and if you did a statistical analysis of that data, there's no significant difference between a 52 point and a 49 point lead, or deficit. In fact, statistically, when it's that close, when it's those percentage points are within 10-15%, there is no significant lead or difference between the two candidates. But news media exploits that for sensationalism and to get people stirred up thinking their candidate is either significantly in the lead or significantly ahead of or behind of each other. And so that's one example of how descriptive statistics can be manipulated to make a point or a counterpoint. A more reliable and valid type of statistical analysis is to utilize inferential statistics. These allow one to infer the meaning of specific testable hypotheses or effects and get you closer to the true meaning of the data. Problematic for Bigfoot research is this type of analysis frequently requires an experimental manipulation to which the rarity of our target species presents a challenge. Nonetheless, certain studies would not have to rely on the creature, but could ultimately be inferred to the creature. The zapping phenomena is one of these and was discussed in detail earlier in one of my earlier shows and earlier in this book. So inferential statistics, if you want to take the shoe sizes and estimate the shoe sizes of everyone in the world, obviously you're not going to go to every state in the United States and every province or subsection of other countries and measure everybody's feet. It would take too long and too costly. So what you do is you take a representative sample of people's shoe sizes, the shoe sizes of men, the shoe sizes of women, the average shoe sizes of children, and then you do that in different locations throughout the world. And then those samples represent the total population of foot sizes when you use inferential statistics. So that's a similar way we could look at the average foot sizes of Bigfoots. We don't have to measure every Bigfoot shoe size. We can get representative samples from casts or footprints in different locations of the United States, maybe by region, break it out, and then do that similarly in other countries of the world. And then we infer, we take a statistic, well, because of the results, we're able to infer with confidence what those shoe sizes would be for the entire population, having never measured the shoe size of the entire population. Let's see. If I find prints bigger than mine, we'll pay attention. I wear a 15 wide. Wow, Bigfoot. Jessica, to infer, wouldn't that be someone's observation? Well, the inference is the sampling, it would be the observation. You'd take a tape measure and you would measure the foot sizes. And in Bigfootdom, if you will, it's pretty commonly encouraged that you you carry a dollar bill, if nothing else, with you if you don't have a tape measure, because the size of a dollar bill is standard, and you can lay that down beside the Bigfoot print for perspective on the size of the print. But you don't have time to observe all the feet in the world or shoe sizes in the feet of the world, so you got to start with these smaller samples. Thank you for that question. Let's see. Ooh, 55. Testimonial evidence. One of the most common forms of evidence. This is either spoken or written evidence given by a witness under oath. It can be gathered in court at a deposition or through an affidavit. This has actually been done to strengthen the veracity of a variety of other types of evidence, Bigfoot types of evidence. People reporting sightings have been known to swear to their account under oath or otherwise legally endorse their reports. My main problem with this is that it still boils down to anecdotal evidence, and that's one of the weakest forms of scientific evidence. So through this talk, I've briefly defined each type of evidence and provided relevant examples to Bigfoot. The concerned reader would do well to consider each type of evidence and come up with their own examples. More importantly, the concerned field researcher or concerned future researcher would do well to consider the evidence they have already incorporated into their Bigfoot philosophy and belief system and weigh that evidence based on reflecting respective defining comments above in these different types of evidence, because it speaks to the experimental value and scientific value as well as legal weight or value of that type of evidence. So that is that. That's my topic on evidence and applying legal standards of evidence or concepts of evidence to the Bigfoot community. I think there's some value in it. As I said on the top of the show, it allows one to better appreciate the value of the evidence and know how much weight to give it. We're about running out of time today. And just as a teaser, so in the middle of January, I'm going to Minneapolis to film my role in Legend Meets Science 2, finally meet my boss in person. And so I've got basically 2 more shows before I head out to Minnesota. I think just because of some discussions I've had with people in between last show and this one, I think my next show will focus on PTSD, looking at the psychiatric and psychological community's definition of what constitutes PTSD, and therefore giving you a chance to see if you meet those criteria. Just because you had a type A encounter doesn't mean you get PTSD. And it's possible to have that encounter, not get any symptoms of PTSD or a few symptoms, and it still not be PTSD. So before you start talking about having PTSD in response to an encounter, it's good to know exactly what that is. And then I'm going to return to the topic in the next show of reconditioning your fight-flight response so that you can minimize your chances of having a fight-flight experience if you have a Class A or B encounter. And the reason I'm revisiting that is one of the 2 things left in that discussion is hypnosis. And that's part of what I'm going to be doing in Legend Meets Science, doing hypnosis with people that have had Class A encounters. So as usual, I want to thank you all very much. I appreciate your attendance, and I can't tell you how much it means to me that you folks come and keep coming back, because this is not everybody's cup cup of tea. And the fact that you're here shows, if nothing else, you've got an open mind and are willing to learn. And I think we need a lot more people like that in the Bigfoot community. So I want to genuinely thank you very much. And all the websites that allow me to post my ads in their group page. So for tonight, I want to encourage you to keep an open mind, keep your boots on the ground, and keep your heart with your higher power. God bless you, and good night.
I see you running out of reason. Don't try to blame it on the seasons. Why you wanna walk away? When we began, swear we had something that would last. Baby, has the feeling passed? Falling in was easy. How do I make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Oh, I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Was I a fool? I know sometimes I may wonder, but I would never leave asunder a thing as good as what we have. Is it a rule? What's good is worth the fighting. There ain't no denying that you and I were made to last. Falling in was easy. How can we make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and Have you had a change of heart? Can we go back to the start? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Tried and true.
Wanna do it all with you by my side. If you're in, meet me here